May you please state your name and age?
I'm David A. Lewis, and I'm 68 years old.
And what is your current occupation?
I'm currently retired, and I am very active with charitable processes.
Okay. Where were you during the beginning of the Cold War?
In the early 1950s, I was in Okinawa in Japan as the son of an Air Force officer. And then later on in the 50s, we left Okinawa in 1953 and came back to the United States. And then I was in Illinois, um, where I went to high school and graduated from high school in 1962. And then I went to college for 2 years. Then I went in the Army.
Okay. What was your specific involvement in the Cold War?
You know, it's difficult to say, Donnie, in that I was involved almost directly with Vietnam, because the Cold War was the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union versus the NATO allies. It's really what we refer to as the Cold War. And I was more involved with the Vietnam War, which I was in. But intelligence-wise, we were involved with what the Soviets were doing, and we were in the three officers course, all dealt with dealing with war in Europe. So it was kind of an anomaly in that we were dealing with a war in Europe which was fought with huge divisions and many, many tanks and many, many people. And then we're actually fighting a war which had to do with platoons and company-size operations in Vietnam. But our principal function was to study the capabilities of the Soviet Union, or what we believed to be the capabilities of the Soviet Union, and to find out, to determine the best way to defend Europe from any sort of offensive action on the part of the Soviet Union. Well, there are three main courses of entry into Europe through the Soviet Union.
What did you have to accomplish by the end of each day?
We had to accomplish the training of our subordinate troops and make sure that they were apprised of the current situation and that they were prepared to deal with the battle. And we had ready forces, division-ready forces, ready brigades that were already, that could fly out in a moment's notice. They could be on planes to deploy into Europe, or for that matter, any place in the world. But really, Europe is where we focused. So we had to make sure that we were contingently ready to deploy. And we had at that time a thing called POMCUS, that was prepositioned military unit sets in Europe, where we could just send our people over there. They pick up the gear out of a POMCUS and immediately go to war.
Can you describe how the society portrayed the enemy through the media, if you recall that?
There was a great deal of propaganda on both sides. The Soviet Union was portrayed as, the great evil under the triumvirate of evil, according to Mr. Reagan. And we were very much afraid of them. The propaganda was that they had a very, very powerful army and a very, very powerful missile base, which we later on found out was not quite as powerful as we thought it was. The image that was portrayed of the Soviet Union was one of very bad, that the economic system was bad for the people, that the people were not doing well over there, and that the military was inclined to expand into Europe in order to extend their influence. And it was our job, according to propaganda, to stop them from growing anymore, to stop the Soviet Union and the spread of communism, not just the Soviet Union, just saying communism in general, because China fell in that same category. We didn't want them to expand in. There was a thing called the domino theory, which was if one small country fell, maybe the next country would fall, and on down the line, just like a series of dominoes. And that was preached as a major threat, the domino. That's why we went to Vietnam. So that we was one of the dominoes. We didn't want that to fall. Oh boy. So
this is kind of more of a personal question. Can you describe someone you admired during this time period?
That particular time was General Max Truman, which was one of the most dynamic individuals I've ever worked for in my life. Extremely demanding and very unforgiving. He was, I'd seen him fire people right in the middle of meetings
Wow.
and promote other people in the middle of meetings. Michael Healy was commander of 5th Special Forces Group, who I looked up to, and I thought he walked on water.
Looking at it now, looking at the past, in what ways did you feel the Cold War affected the United States?
It affected the United States in many ways. Start with, we spent a great deal of money on defense.
Yeah.
But I hesitate to say too much, because the end result was, with President Reagan, the Cold War came to an end.
Yeah.
And he is the one who really built up the force that said to the Soviet Union, we're not fooling around. You fool around with us, you're going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, that money could have been put to so much better use in other ways. And I think that the fear of the Soviet Union and the fear of communism, which was perpetrated by people like J. Edgar Hoover, like Mr. Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
The Cold War had a great deal of influence on other countries. The United States made compacts with NATO, with numerous other countries, in order to try and build a bulwark of defensive positions around the world.
Yeah.
It involved deployment of troops and our existence of foreign bases. Mm-hmm. That got to be very expensive.
Yeah.
Some of this was good for the exposure of the American military to other people, other nations, other populations, other peoples, and some of it was bad because our troops did not always behave in the best way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, most of them did. And I believe that most countries appreciated the presence of that because of the economic input that came from it.
The last question we have here is, do you think that the United States should be praised or condemned for its involvement in the Cold War?
I think absolutely praised. I think because it did stop the spread of communism. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good thing that we were involved with it. And I'm pleased that it turned out as it did. I enjoyed it very. You did ask about one thing that meant the most to me, and that was in 1963, October of 63, when Mr. Khrushchev was sending missiles into Cuba.
Oh, yeah.
I was in a military school in Washington, D.C., and we thought we were following that very closely because we thought we were going to be called up any minute to send it. And that was something that I didn't want to do. I mean, I was just 18 and 19 years old at that time. 18, I guess. No, I was 19 at that time. So that was probably the most dramatic thing that happened to me during the Cold War. Yes, very much so.
Okay, well, that's basically the end of our interview. Thank you so much for participating.
Well, thank you very much for asking. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.